Today, we're very fortunate to have a great speaker, and I'm going to ask our president, Stan Albrecht, to do that introduction for us. Stan.
As everyone in this room well understands, we are living in an enormously complicated world right now. We don't even know who our primary enemies are. I saw something in the paper the other day where policymakers in Washington were debating whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Is it Russia, as Russia in some ways attempts to reestablish some of the boundaries of the old Soviet Union? Is it China? Is it Iran or North Korea? Is our greatest concern, our greatest fear external, or is it on our own territory? And so it's a different geopolitical environment for us, and that creates all kinds of challenges. I happened the night before last to be sitting at a dinner table in Indianapolis at a board meeting with a three-star general who oversaw the withdrawal of American troops from Iraq. And we spent a lot of time talking about the political complications of Iraq and Syria and what is going on in that part of our world. And so we live in a very, very difficult and very challenging time. Professor Jeannie Johnson brings to us an incredible array of experience, including a lot of experience looking at these issues from the inside. And Jeannie is not only one of our best teachers, but to be able to expose our students to an individual who has had the range of experience that she has had is absolutely remarkable. It's one of the things I love about Utah State University. Our students come and take classes not just from faculty members who have read the textbook, but from faculty members who have written the textbook, who have done the research and engaged the students in that process. And so we're deeply honored, Jeannie, to have you as our speaker here this morning. Please join me in recognizing Professor Jeannie Johnson.
Thank you to all of you for being here today. I'm excited to talk to you about this topic. It is one near and dear to my heart, and I want to give you a little bit of background on what inspires our conversation today. My particular brand of research is something called American strategic culture. And what it looks at is the way our national culture and the organizational cultures of the particular institutions within our security community. So institutions like the Department of Defense or CIA or the State Department, how their internal cultures impact on the way we do security policy. Now, this field of strategic culture was originally intended to look at adversary groups and be able to understand them, their internal workings, their motivations, their perceptions on the world with more clarity, and therefore be better able to anticipate their action. And so what we have done at Utah State is take that perspective, but then also turn that lens inward. Because if you remember Sun Tzu's famous dictum, he said, first, know thyself and know thy enemy, so that you can be victorious in 100 battles. And I think we miss much in the know thyself category. And what it means is that we have habitual predispositions that have been a part of our security patterns over time. Some of those are to advantage, and some are not. And becoming self-aware, becoming cognizant of what these patterns look like and what interests they advance, and more importantly, which they inhibit, is a critical function in improving our security policy. So as the president just introduced, we have an array of formidable foreign policy problems in front of us. So let's take a look at what some of those might be. The first thing to do is to recognize something that may at the outset sound like hyperbole. We are no longer a superpower. We are what the textbooks call a hyperpower. What that means is that we have no peer. We are a unipolar power. There are only a few times across human history where this event has remained and remained steady for a lengthy period of time. So we are living in a somewhat unprecedented era. Unipolar power, hegemon of the globe. What that means is that there isn't another, for instance, country that can mount serious contest with our Navy. And an anecdote I often use with my students is that the way that you know this is if there's a movie in which our Navy wants to show its big guns. We actually have to bring aliens to the earth to fight, because there is not another country that has a blue water navy that can take ours on. Now, with that position on the globe comes not only enormous responsibility, but a requirement for a capacity to understand how the politics of this globe works. We cannot afford to be insular, and we cannot afford to have naive notions about the other players on the scene. So, some of particular concern. First, it won't surprise you at all that I've picked this spot on the globe. You may have heard in the news this week some rather unfavorable assessments of our 6,000 flights and bombing sorties against ISIS. They have amounted to very little. Those who we have called to rally round, frankly, the American flag in Syria have amounted to all of 60 fighters. And they haven't fared terribly well when put in the field, as you might imagine, in such small numbers. We have not cracked the code on ISIS. We don't know why they are attractive to recruits. We don't know how effectively they are or are not governing the pieces of territory that they hold. And we don't know how to put them back in a box, how to defeat them. Perhaps more importantly, from a strategic culture perspective, we don't know why our regional allies are not doing more to squelch this threat in their own neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, of course, the ISIS threat is not alone. Probably the piece of the Middle East that has been most in the news of late is Iran, due to the nuclear deal. And I think it's important to recognize the nuclear deal for the historic moment in time that it is. And those who look closely at Iran also recognize that this particular deal does not inhibit this regional power from continuing to be a nuisance in other ways, and perhaps a better financially supplied nuisance. It is known for its proxy work and has been a consistent adversary in most of our endeavors in the region. How do you approach that without scuttling the nuclear strides forward? Well, you had better know your partner, your Persian partner, on the other side pretty well in order to stand that. An additional complicating factor, as you probably know, is that it is the Shia militias that are the few, Peshmerga in the Kurdish region also, but primarily the Shia militias that are making any headway against ISIS, which makes Iran in some ways more partner than adversary in that fight. All right, next one, again, not a surprise, is little green men in the Ukraine. This has brought on an advent that we are calling hybrid warfare, where Russia keeps the level of warfare just below a critical threshold that would kick in, for instance, NATO obligations. We haven't figured out how do we effectively counter this. All of the armaments and military thinking that we have to date assembled against Russia is for large-scale conventional war. We don't know what to do when the war is below that threshold and when there seems to be some indigenous sympathy for Russian overtures in the areas where they're invading. So this is very difficult. And the next photo, which may surprise you a little bit, is representative of how little we know about Russia. Why do they dig this, is the bottom line. You know, we use it to comedic effect, and in Russia it doesn't play that way. This is not the only shirtless photo of Putin, you probably know that. You know, the memes of him, he's riding a bear, he likes to fish shirtless, swim in cold rivers shirtless. And the Russians, this resonates in a way that it wouldn't resonate in the United States of America, and is a window into the fact that there's a lot there that we simply don't understand. Next piece of the globe, and we're going to have a little more to say about this one later, is North Korea. North Korea we typically think of in terms as a perhaps unstable, perhaps bellicose, future adversary, or current adversary if you're thinking in the nuclear realm. But more likely, the way we will deal with North Korea is as the most gigantic social experiment to have ever hit the globe. When North Korea folds through whatever mechanism, we will be dealing with a society that is properly termed the Hermit Kingdom, that has had few, if any, links to the outside world, and has a social construction that is utterly alien. Where does this come from in our American heritage? Well, it comes from a very proud moment, our enamored relationship with things. It comes from the fact that it was indeed logistical excellence, peerless logistical excellence, that won us the day in World War II. No one can make stuff and move stuff like the United States of America. We have set new standards across the globe in this category, and when that is the category that matters, bringing stuff to bear in a conventional fight, we are exactly the ones you want to call on. What that means, however, is that this particular strength has settled into our psyche as the strategic strength and tends to get in the way of other perhaps more important strengths in different kinds of fights, counterinsurgent fights, counter-terror fights. So let me give you a couple of examples. Our love affair with technology means that this is the way DoD operates. And I can give you a little inside baseball on that because I continue to work with both DoD and CIA and the State Department, and so can give you kind of a window into some of that thinking. So one of my colleagues who looks at the United States and also looks at Israel and Russia and a number of our European partners noted, not facetiously, that while many great powers around the world will assess their current threat and then look for perhaps a technology that could meet that threat, the United States instead gets enamored with a piece of technology. We are so excited that we produced it, we purchase it as the Defense Department, and then look around for a threat to which it might apply. And you know, I would like for that to be somewhat an exaggeration. It just frankly is not. I have seen some of the most ridiculous episodes of my lifetime come from our love affair with technology. So let me give you two quick examples. The first was to meet the challenge of being able to talk to indigenous folks on the ground. We don't have sufficient translators. Americans are not well known for their wide repertoire of foreign linguistic skills. And so we came up with the phraselator. The phraselator, and I'm only going to let you guess at how many American taxpayer dollars were put into creating the phraselator. But what you do, of course, is speak English into one side, and then it ticker tapes out the appropriate Arabic on the other side that then you can use to speak back and forth with this person on the ground. Now, I don't know how many of you have been traveling and have seen, you know, T-shirts emblazoned with what locals thought was a clever American phrase, and you took pictures of it so you could laugh a little bit back home. But even those who are well acquainted with the language can make some pretty bad mistakes. A colleague of mine who's German was working with her military in an anthropological vein, and she was very excited that her military was receptive to her help and her advice as an anthropologist. And she was addressing a large convention of a multinational group, and the way she phrased this was, "I'm just so happy that my commander has taken advantage of me over and over again." And I took her aside after the talk, put my arm around her, and suggested some alternative phrasing for what she was attempting to convey. The point is, a machine, a phraselator, you put your intent in, you can only imagine the disasters that came out the other end. Now, I would like to tell you that that's the worst I've seen. Our own Space Dynamics Lab got a tasking, or a proposed tasking, from the Air Force, who I like to pick on particularly, although we just left their Air Force Academy last night, just arrived from there last night. But their tasking was asking our scientists to build a sky-based system that could, through biological and physiological markers, identify a terrorist on the ground. Now, how would they do this? Well, because if you're a terrorist getting on an airplane, you're going to be nervous. You're going to be sweating, high heart rate. You're about to, right. Thank you for your reaction. That is the appropriate reaction. Because exactly, right. So you watch out, right? Because our sky-based system is going to identify you as an active jihadist, and you will soon be in an interrogation cell. So as you get, ridiculous sorts of attachments to technology, wanting them to replace basic human endeavors, or what need to be. And what this means is we are accused by even some of our closest friends and allies of astrategic thinking, meaning you become so enamored with the tactical, so enamored with your stuff and what it can do, that you stop thinking about what it all means and what your goals are politically, why you are applying these tools in the first place. And so though you may win tactical battles, though you may be able to trump an adversary in a discrete operation, often the tools you use are such blunt instruments or have such force that they undermine the political objectives that you were setting to achieve in the first place. So, add to that blind spot this famous quote by Henry Ford, which is taken, by the way, out of context and truncated, but this is the way that Americans say it. History is more or less bunk. How does that inhibit us? We don't have a high requirement for our elected officials to be well-versed in history, well-versed in foreign affairs. Ted Stewart told me that the GOP candidates, while I was on the airplane, were actually talking about foreign affairs last night, which shocked me. I hope he's not fibbing, so the rest of you can let me know if he is. It shocked me, because that is often a conversation that is left very much underdeveloped in our political campaigns. And so we don't place high premium on knowledge of foreign places, on experience in foreign places, and tend to be very forward-looking. Being forward-looking can be a virtue, but it also means that past patterns completely elude us. And I want to give you a sense of how this can play out in a foreign policy arena. So in my previous life, I worked for both the intelligence community and for the State Department, and I was stationed in Croatia during our 1999 bombing campaign of Serbia over the issue of Kosovo. And while there, it's important to note, part of our job was, of course, assessing the duration of the bombing campaign, because this was a NATO campaign, and if you think it's hard to get, the wife and kids to all agree on pizza, try and getting all NATO allies to agree on bombing target sets in a foreign country. So that was going to be a formidable challenge. So the estimate coming out of DoD intelligence circles and CIA was that the bombing campaign would last 3 days. It was going to be, a great show of force, and Milosevic would cave. This is what was going to happen. Well, for those of you who remember this bombing campaign, you remember that it went on for 79. And what that meant is that we had long ago run out of what were acceptable bombing targets in this campaign. So we looked ridiculous. We were doing things like bombing the same piece of rubble over and over again and just breaking it into smaller and smaller pieces. We made mistakes. We bombed an Albanian convoy because the signature from the air looked an awfully lot like a Serbian military convoy. It was a convoy of Albanian refugees and killed 60 people. You may recall also that we bombed the Chinese embassy. Now, for those of you who have entertained yourself with wild conspiracy theories about this, I have the map. It was my going away present from the Balkan Task Force. The map that says that the Chinese embassy is instead the Federal Directorate of Supply and Procurement. It had been a military installation for Serbia. They had sold it to the Chinese the year prior. The Chinese had moved in. Our map was 1998, and it was 1999 when we were bombing. So we bombed the Chinese embassy. Now, just to put those conspiracy theories to bed a little bit, I hope. My favorite is that the Chinese had somehow acquired a stealth bomber and had hidden it in the embassy, and we needed to get rid of the technology so they couldn't have it. Now, folks, I don't know if you have visited an embassy of any stripe, but we don't typically have garages downstairs that can admit a stealth bomber. So you can sort of drive it in, right, and park it. Not typically. But the best part of this is, as wild as the conspiracy theories ranged, does anyone want to guess the one group of folks who knew this was an accident on the part of the Americans? Right, the Chinese. Why? Because they knew we got nothing out of it. They didn't have a stealth bomber. But when our committee went to meet with them and say, we're so sorry, this was a mistake, they said to us, we know. We're a big government, we make mistakes too. But don't expect us to admit that publicly. Like, we're gonna go to town with this, you know that, right? So we are going to make great political hay out of this, and they did. So that was a mistake, and for any of you who are prior Air Force, you can't land with ordnance strapped to your plane. So if you take off from Aviano Air Base and fly your sortie, you gotta drop it somewhere, or you can't land. So if we had cloud cover or for any other reason that ordnance couldn't be dropped on its proper target, we were dropping it in the Adriatic. Lots of it. And no one knew this until an Italian fisherman pulled one in with his fishing net and blew up his boat. Now, I'm happy to report to you, he's okay. He just went for a long ride in the air. The fish, the boat, not so okay. But what this highlighted to the international community was the Americans are dumping all kinds of military ordnance into the sea. So we were in crisis mode. Milosevic is not folding, and one morning the ambassador came in. We were having our typical morning meeting. The ambassador came in more flustered than usual and threw a newspaper down on the table. And this darling little face was looking back at us, little Serbian girl wearing a target on her head. The Serbs had run the Belgrade Marathon the day before, during the bombing campaign, run the marathon, and the runners, in a show of defiance, had put targets on their heads. The spectators loved this, ran home, made their own targets, came back wearing targets on their heads. The Serb who owned the McDonald's put a giant target on the top of the McDonald's. And the ambassador walked in at the peak of frustration, threw down the newspaper and said, "Who are these Serbs? Who are these Serbs?" And in that moment, I thought, that's the question, isn't it? We know everything about Milosevic. We know his prescription medication. We know where his bedroom is. We know about his childhood. We know about his wife's childhood. We know his hopes and dreams. Who are these Serbs? Is our deficit area. We can't answer that. And because we can't answer that, we can't tell you why this bombing campaign is now in day 30, 35, 42, 56. We can't tell you that. We can't tell you what it is that will make them fold and make this stop. That was our deficit. We hadn't sufficiently invested in understanding Serbian culture, had we? We may have first noticed that this picture hangs in Serbian homes, dentist offices, elementary schools. It would have acted as a first clue. This is called Kosovo Girl, and she's giving a fallen Serb a last drink on the field of blackbirds, which is today known as Kosovo. That would have told us there is a vibrant, alive narrative about the power of this place and what it means to Serbs. They are not likely to give it up easily. What's more, because of our ahistorical nature, we had no concept that something that happened in 1389 could be resonating with Serbs in 1999. But wow, does it. So Prince Lazar, who was charged with success in this battle, Serbian prince, was having a supper. This is the legend that goes with this painting. He was having a supper with all of his generals. This is going to start to sound a little familiar. A last supper with all of his generals. One of them departed the supper and took their battle plans and gave them to the Turks. Betrayed his prince. As the prince walked out into the evening, he was met by a heavenly visitor who said, "You have been betrayed, and you have a choice. Tomorrow, you can either die in battle or surrender to the Turks and live in shame." Now notice what choice is missing. Victory. Not a part of the choice matrix. So you can die in battle, and I will build for you a heavenly kingdom in Serbia, or you can surrender to the Turks and live in shame. So from a cultural perspective, our acultural lens is missed. For Serbs, victory isn't winning. That's already been predetermined. You're not going to win. Victory is going down in style. That's victory. And another signal to this effect is the fact that the date of this battle is their national holiday. A day of defeat at the hands of the Turks is nationally celebrated because they did it right. They didn't surrender. They went down in style. So this feller, not going to be revived by a magic elixir that she's giving him. He's going to die. That's his fate. And that's the painting that hangs in Serbian homes. Because we didn't understand that, we engaged in an entirely debilitating practice, something called mirror imaging. And in short form, this means simply looking at Milosevic, looking at the Serbs and saying, well, I know what you're going to do next, because all I have to do is imagine what I would do in your shoes. It's entirely the wrong construct for anticipating the activities of foreign populations, and we do it all the time. So, if that's not enough of a blind spot for you, the next one is that we tend to see foreign policy or foreign challenges as problem sets. And we are problem solvers. And our favorite tool is economics. So if there's a problem out there, be it ISIS or terrorism or China being angry with us, there is an economic fix. We just need to figure out what it is. So we are terribly good at doing things like moving into Iraq or Afghanistan and saying, let us build up your state for you. We've done this in Haiti and Dominican and Nicaragua and Cuba and the Philippines and Japan and South Korea and Germany. We know how to build state. So we're going to build up the state. We're going to gift it to you And then you can operate as a functioning democracy. Because as soon as you have roads and schools and a parliament building, we're pretty sure that democracy can take off as a natural output. And so we do it. We do good stuff. We built a road in Afghanistan, we've built schools in Iraq, and medical clinics, and telephone lines, and if we're talking about Haiti in 1915, telegraph lines, right? We've been doing this from time immemorial. And they are wonderful services. They tend to be utterly unsustainable by the populations that we give them to. And more importantly, they often have consequences that we did not foresee. Because we have benign intent. And I'm here to tell you, you can be critical of your country about a lot of things, but we do still stand in an exceptional category of having typically very generously benign intent for the places that we build up. We want them to function. We want them to be part of the democratic community. We want to sell our stuff to them. We want them to be a solid partner for us. And we want to leave and go home and let them operate on their own. That is not the pattern typical for most imperial powers across the time. We really are different in that category. But often in our fits of enthusiasm, we build up their countries in ways that we don't, in long-term perspective, see what the consequences are going to be. So let me just paint you a quick picture. This picture played out in Haiti, Dominican, Nicaragua, and in Vietnam. We build infrastructure, we build roads into places that had previously been insulated from the touch of central government. We build communication lines into these places. And because local authorities tend to be not very helpful in this process, we sort of get rid of them and replace them with what we see as our own guys, more cooperative, more sympathetic to the good things we're trying to do. And then we build up a national security force. We train them. Typically the recruits to our national security force are people who are disgruntled with their own countrymen. I mean, I want you to think for a minute. Let's pretend we have another government shutdown. I'm sure it's never going to happen, but let's just pretend. We have another government shutdown, we're on the brink of recession, again, complete fantasy, right? And the Chinese finally say, we've had enough. You owe us so much money, and you clearly don't have your act together. We need to invade and just set things right in the United States. You're in political crisis and economic crisis, and we can't afford for you to be there. So they invade, and they come into your neighborhood with guns, and they say, we need a militia to help us keep the peace. Because you can see how dysfunctional your country is, right? So I have a translator who's now telling you, I need some volunteers to come join a force that we are going to train who can help keep your fellow countrymen in line. Who joins that force? Who is that guy? You don't like him, whoever he is, right? You regard him as scum of the earth. And you know what? Frankly, many of them are. These are the recruits who come join a foreign force to help keep their own countrymen in line. These are not cream of the crop, folks. So we empower them. We give them guns. We give them skills. And over time, sometimes this body can attain its own legitimacy. Sometimes it can become decently well regarded. But think about this combo. We train them up, make them loyal to a central institution, which is sponsored by a foreign power, and then build infrastructure to give them reach into the countryside. And then we leave. What's that a recipe? That's a recipe for democracy, right? That's a recipe, folks, for Somoza in Nicaragua. We trained him. For Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, we trained him. That's a recipe for the Shia taking over all of Iraq and excising the Sunni from their ranks. That was our institution. We trained up that institution. And so we have benign intent, but we don't pause to look over the legacy of what that benign intent of building up stuff and training a local security force creates when we depart. The places where we have stayed have worked out differently. Philippines is a bit of a rocky boat, I'll give you that, right? And Andrew and Lucy can tell you about South Korea. But have we packed up and gone home from South Korea? Please tell me you know the answer to that. It's no, all right? No. We've not even packed up and gone home from Germany and Japan, folks, right? And so the places where we have stayed and they have worked their own system out have been far more productive than the places where we've zoomed in, attempted to train up a national security force, built a lot of infrastructure, and zoomed back out. Now, where infrastructure is concerned, there is a better way, and I'm happy to report to you, we even did it, right? It was even us. Now, this photo is going to look a little funny to you, but I want you to give him a chance. This fellow represents a group of men who are my absolute heroes. They are the Combined Action Platoon Marines of Vietnam. Now, I have a soft spot for Marines, so I'm sorry to all of you Army folk. My dad is a colonel, and this keeps him up at night. But he's convinced I'm just enamored with the dress blues. Maybe it's true, I don't know. But Cap Marines of Vietnam were involved in a program that runs very much against our traditional American tendencies to go big, to spend lots of money, build up huge infrastructure. These guys were stuck in Vietnamese villages, and Westmoreland hated their program, thought it was a cockamamie idea, so squeezed them for budget. They had no budget, and they were told to do civic action and build up the villages and get their economy rolling and all of these fantastical ideas with no budget, and just a group of 14 enlisted Marines, all right, living on their own with thousands of Vietnamese villagers. So this is what civic action looks like when you're in that circumstance. You do very much sort of Boy Scoutish, what can I help you with today kind of activity. And you know what that yielded for us? It yielded genuine strategic benefits. First off, they got to know the villagers well enough that they were excellent sources of intelligence. The villagers didn't have enough of a death wish to walk up to them directly and give them intelligence, because the VC certainly would have found that out. But they would instead either tell it to their Vietnamese counterparts who were in the military, or little children, or more importantly, these Marines simply knew their village so well that they knew when the rice store was down, the VC had been through. Or when villagers started acting just a little off, they knew something was coming. So they became one of our best sources of intelligence and genuinely intertwined with the Vietnamese villagers in a way that made the villagers want to protect them, want to watch their back, want to help them in their endeavors. It wasn't from building big medical clinics. They did build a couple of schools, but here's how that went. They could get no supplies, and Marines, you know, they're scrappers anyway, because they get the least of our budget, which they like to make a lot of hay out of. So the Marines would appropriate an Army truck. You all know what that means, right? And drive the villagers to the Army dump at one of the bases, and then sit with the villagers in the dump, tearing apart ammo boxes and pounding the nails back straight. They would take the wood and the old nails back to the village, and with the villagers build a school with those supplies. I love the Marines. So that's a better way. Why is it a better way? It's sustainable, first off. It doesn't waste US treasure. It incurs genuine gratitude from the locals who see that you're with them and you're not lording your material largesse over them. One of the wisest things that I've ever heard on this front came from a Cap Marine captain who said, generosity that cannot be reciprocated breeds hostility, not gratitude. Now think about that for a minute. Generosity that cannot be reciprocated breeds hostility. You feel small, and it doesn't help with relations. So there is a better way. We just need to be willing to do it, be willing to think it. All right. Finally, all of our metrics for success tend to be numerical. And this gets in the way of genuine assessments of how our strategy is working. The most famous, of course, from Vietnam is this one, the body count. That's how we attempted to assess success. And folks, we haven't moved much further forward from that, as completely ineffectual as it was. So today, we count schools that we built in Afghanistan, even if they don't have teachers or students. Today, we count the number of kills in our Predator drone strikes on terrorist organizations, even if it tells us nothing about whether that organization remains attractive to recruits. We haven't moved very far forward in our policy, but there's hope because USU is going to save the world. And how are we going to do that exactly? Well, I have pioneered with the intelligence community an analytical tool called cultural topography that takes this basic notion of strategic culture, looking at national cultures and looking at particular organizational cultures, and refines it into an analytical tool that can pinpoint in very specific terms areas of concern and produce what we call in the industry actionable cultural data, actionable intelligence, all right? And I won't sort of go on and on about the details of this, although I'd like to, because it's pretty much my favorite subject. But I will tell you that it looks at the identity, the norms, the values, and the worldview of any particular adversary and of ourselves as regards this issue. So we know what our own vulnerabilities are. And in so doing, has unearthed some really striking insights. So this is currently in play in the intelligence community. It's been adopted as a standard analytic tool and has already yielded real benefits. And our students are the only students in the nation being trained on it. So let me tell you a little bit about what they're doing, because I invited them to come today, the collection, and Kelsey just had to run somewhere, so we'll introduce her in a minute. So the first is Miss Brianna Bowen. I'm so excited to have her with me here today. I'm using her computer up here, and I just want to show you something. This annoying little overlay to her keyboard, yeah, it's Russian. Do you see that? Those are Russian characters. Because she's learning Russian on her own, because not only is she trained in CTOPS, as we call it, but she's now been accepted to Oxford and St. Antony's College, and her particular area of study is going to be looking at Russia, understanding their internal workings, and perhaps helping to advance our notions of what they are doing with this new brand of hybrid warfare. I took her with me to this conference at the US Air Force Academy over the last few days, where she met with the nation's top experts on both China and Russia, as well as the man who helped pen our national nuclear posture statement for the nation. So she has met already a number of people of influence and has begun to make inroads in the community that looks most intensively at Russia and how to forge our policy there. It doesn't hurt that she was also our valedictorian, so we're very excited about that and about her future endeavors. Kelsey, who is with us, did a cultural topography paper. You can see just by the pollution, you know where they are, right? It's Logan in the winter. So she did a paper for us on China, and specifically looking at social media. Now you have to know, social media is the rage everywhere in the intelligence community, figuring out how to analyze social media and what we can find by social media. And I look at a lot of those products, and I am here to tell you, I recommend them to Kelsey. I tell them about her findings, because her findings as an undergraduate are more sophisticated than a number of the computational model outputs that I have seen in Washington, D.C. So she isolated what the narratives were in social media. She speaks Chinese. In fact, she's going there tomorrow, back to China. She speaks Chinese and did an amazing job exercising this particular analytical tool to unearth insights. So like with Kelsey, when these papers are produced and they are particularly good, I take them with me to Washington in the training that I do for the intelligence community. And I say, analysts, because they get a little intimidated, I assign a lot of work to them. And if they start giving me a little pushback, I hold up papers from Brianna, or Kelsey, or Andrew, or Lucy, and say, folks, undergraduates in landlocked Utah can do this. You can do it too, and hold up their work as a standard. So the next couple I would like to introduce you to are Lucy and Andrew Averseth. And if you can't tell from this monument, they just returned from South Korea. Lucy taught English there and came home with a wide range of insights on South Korean culture. Andrew landed something absolutely phenomenal for any American, and especially one so young as he. He worked with North Korean refugees and defectors, worked to help acclimate them to South Korea and think about potential reunification in the future. He will be a national level asset when this place goes down. And so will Lucy. They both have insight into this place that is rarely found and rarely analyzed correctly by any American. Our students are doing phenomenal things. And there are a number of them that I just can't tell you about. But I had lunch with two weeks ago. And so they are inside the system, working the same problem and with the same training. So if you're having a tired time sleeping at night, you can rest easy because Aggies are out there and they are going to save the world. Thank you.